Russ Hewitt with us, who are going to be our main speakers here, and I will be facilitating it. Before we jump into our discussion, I would like to just let everybody know that we are recording this session so that we can share it with those that have stated their interest in attending, but their calendars just didn't enable it. So we will be recording it, and we will be sending it out also to those that are attending so that you can review this session a little bit later. Also, I do hope, in light of the lockdown, we have seen that some of the attendees are across Australia and New Zealand. And with the lockdown, I do hope that you and your families are remaining healthy and safe during this time. It's very interesting times, and we do appreciate you carving out the time necessary in attending this webinar. So thank you very much. So without else to do, let me jump into today's session. Today, we are going to be discussing, Steve, Russ, and I are going to be having a conversation around de-risking digital transformation projects. And we've decided to make this more of an open type of discussion versus sharing a lot of PowerPoints. I think there's enough sessions out in the industry that are PowerPoint heavy. And sometimes it's just nice to have a conversation and to hear what some experts are seeing out in the industry. So I will be facilitating this session moving forward, and we will be having the last 10 minutes opening it up to everyone to allow you to ask some questions. But please, during that time, if you do have a question and you want to ask it, and I can weave it in that particular topic as we're talking, please add it to the chat. I have the chat window open, and I will be reading those and seeing how we can weave in some of those questions into our conversation at that time. What I'd like to do is let Steve and Russ introduce themselves and tell you about their background and a little bit about themselves here at Assurity and where they've come from in their past career experience. Steve?
Yeah, well, as the oldest in the group, I was actually told to keep my introduction short. So I'll just go back over the past 20 years. I have a military background, but latterly I have sort of had a career in IT, working for companies like EDS, HP, and finally Unisys. So I've got a background in systems integration, outsourcing, and sales. But I've also got a passion for removing bad behavior out of projects. And I run a couple of courses at Vic University along those lines around dysfunctional behavior. So some of the things we're going to be talking about today, I'm quite passionate about.
Thanks, Steve. Good morning, everyone. Russell Hewitt. So in the interest of one-upmanship, I'm a 25-year IT test professional. So I cut my teeth originally in the UK and across Europe, before more latterly being involved in two of the largest profile projects in New Zealand over the last 13 years. Head of digital delivery at Assurity, and I guess for me, it's quite a passion for myself is the collaboration and transparency that we now embrace during project delivery, and how that can help you really focus on successful delivery.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Steve and Russ. So what I thought we would do just to kind of open up and ease into the conversation is to ask three questions of you that basically short responses, true or false. If you want to just support your answer with a couple of sentences, that's fine, but not anything elaborate at this moment. It's just going to help prepare us for the rest of the conversation. So, Steve, I'm going to throw this first one to you. A number of projects still fail. True or false?
That's absolutely true. Regardless of advances in sort of education, methodology, and frameworks, the number of projects that fail is remaining fairly consistent over the years. And some people are putting that as high as 70% of projects fail. I'm sure later we'll talk about what does fail mean, but absolutely true.
Great. So Russ, True or false? You can test your way out of that failure.
It's a definite false for me on that one. Testing your way out of failure indicates your project has failed. It means that you've embraced a testing strategy at the end of the life cycle. You're already likely to fail to hit your targets for the project, even if you get it over the line in terms of cost. Your good test strategy will look to mitigate that failure really early. So it's really key that you don't end up testing your way out of failure, rather the testing provides you the management information to avoid failure and course correct quickly.
And my last one, this one's more forward looking. So Steve, I'm going to throw this one your way. With the onset of AI, autonomous testing is going to be more of the focus. So therefore, manual testing is dead. True or false?
I'll go false with this as well. And at some point, I'm going to look across to Russ to sort of back me up here. But yeah, human-centered testing, that sort of non-functional testing, is still paramount in project success. And those aspects of testing are very, very difficult to automate or replicate through things like AI or ML. So I'm going to say false to that, and I'll look to Russ to back me up with some facts.
I'm gonna go false as well from my point of view. Look, AI and machine learning will be a big part of the future for us in terms of enabling testing to really give confidence at an early stage, but it'll always be tied to a technology, a platform. What it will do is free people up to focus on high value testing, but you will always need the people focused, which quite often people success and business success is across multiple platforms, multiple systems. So definite false for me.
Great. So let's start off this conversation with the first question that I had asked for the true or false, which is around project failure. And Steve, you had said that it's true, right? We are 2 decades deep in project initiation and deployment, and we're still seeing some project failures. Can you explain why that might be the case and what failure actually means today?
Yeah, I think Michelle, I mean, IT projects are just notoriously difficult to manage, and I'm going to stick with IT just because it's sort of pertinent to our discussion here. Obviously, there are other types of projects. I mean, people like HPR and Gartner, yeah, are giving figures like, as I said before, 60% of big data projects fail. In fact, that might be slightly conservative. Most organizations, there's only a very, very small percentage of organizations that complete 100% of their projects successfully. And when I say small, it's about 2%. And a stat which actually I find very, very frightening, which came out of McKinsey, is 17% of IT projects go so bad that they can end the very existence of the company. All right, so failure is prevalent. It's still out there. You talked about how do we define failure. If you talk to the PMI, they have their iron triangle of cost, scope, time, cost, and quality. But actually, for me, a project fails if it doesn't deliver the benefit or the value that it intended to. So we can have projects that on paper are successful, but still don't deliver the value to the organization.
And on paper, do you mean it's within budget and it met the timeline?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. We have this sort of, it's not a falsehood. Obviously time, cost, and quality are very, very important, but there is a reason why we do projects, and those projects are to make a change or improve value or provide something. And if they don't do that, then we failed. So for me, it's all about the value that's being generated by projects and how we realize that value.
Yeah, I completely agree. And when I look at the projects that have failed, I think there's some consistent themes that come through, but a couple for me are really having strong leadership. Wherever there isn't a strong leadership on a project in the organization, the projects tend to fail or do not achieve the right outcome for the organization. And it's also the maturity of the organization and having that clear definition of success.
So just on that leadership and maturity levels, are there any specific roles that you see or maturity of organizations when it comes into the success of projects that you've been involved in?
You go, Steve.
Hey, look, I'm a bit of a zealot about this, Michelle. For me, one of our biggest failings around projects is in the area of governance. And for me, perhaps the most important role on a project or program is the project sponsor or the SRO, depending if we're talking to government. And the reason why I say that is I believe that person is the guardian of the business value. So in terms of governance, any decisions that are taken around governance should be focused on their impact on the value that the project is going to generate. So if we look at extending scope, does that improve value? If we look at reducing cost, is that degrading value? And at some point, you have to look at the validity of the project going forward. And that for me is one of the key roles of governance is the project still valid? And I know I'm sort of banging on about governance, but actually a data point into those governance decisions comes from testing.
So interesting, one of the questions we have from the attendees is about that value and metrics. And what should you have baked into the project from the beginning around specific metrics and value and the impact of the business? How has that changed? If it's not around the budget and keeping within a particular timeline of delivery, what are some of those metrics today?
I think what we often overlook when we look at initiating projects is the original business case. The business has come up with a business case which will have a return on investment in it. Yeah, why are we doing the project and what do we expect to see returned? You could imagine that as we change different variables around the project, that's going to impact the ROI. Right, so for me, one of those key roles in governance is to track what the expected ROI is now as a subject to change on the project. And that will again drive that question, is the project still valid? Am I getting the return that I expect? And I should have some thresholds within that, which will allow me to make those sometimes difficult decisions around whether we stop the project, we cancel the project, or we proceed. So a key one for me is ROI, plus a very clear understanding of the original business case.
So Russ, just on that and on the ROI, a lot of these projects are very customer facing, partner facing, external market facing is probably a better way to look at it. And this customer centricity is becoming quite critical. So how does that feed into the success of a particular project, having that customer centric view?
For me, it's becoming more and more essential. And it's more, so when we talk about customer centricity, we're talking about the people in the chain. People talk about customers, and quite often it creates a blinker view of the customer being someone who consumes your software out in the world, external to your organization. Yes, that's true, that's part of it, but it's understanding the people, both internal and external, in your ecosystems, and testing through their lens and actually measuring them. And that testing starts right at the start of the process, during the design. That's when you start to look at how you measure the impact to your customer. And we're talking to a friend of mine in our ministry, the challenge he faces is actually changing the culture from testing to the stated requirements to actually, how do I embed the voice of the customer in testing? How do we embed the people? And it starts right at the start of the process of how can we expose functionality from fast prototyping, views of actually interaction with systems, to the people to get fast feedback, to really qualify, are the changes you're making going to make a meaningful impact to your customer? to achieve the goals for your organization, typically product-based these days, but everything you do has an impact. So it's understanding that impact on the people to achieve your product goals.
So what's actually required then? Just getting a little bit more tactical here, getting that customer-centric view and requirements that will change. You had said it changes, you need to have a culture change, a mindset change, which actually impacts the testing. But what's actually required? How do you get that information?
So there's a few things that are required to change it. And you're right, it is a cultural shift. It's understanding, we talk a lot in the industry about how we shift left to test earlier in the process. Well, it's actually about changing the lens on that slide to say, how do we fail really quickly? How do we seek to gain verification on our plan design as early as possible? Because it's okay to fail. It's changing the culture of the organization to look for failure early. Because if you look for failure, the teams will innovate. People naturally innovate. So the traditional approach would be looking at testing as a necessary evil, a cost center, the ambulance at the bottom of a cliff. This embeds cost and delays. What you're trying to do is change the culture of the organization to say, we want to achieve a goal for our product, our organization. How do we fail really quickly? How do we verify at the earliest possible investment point that the changes or proposed functionality actually meets the needs of our people, both internally and externally? And when we look for that failure, projects will automatically innovate really quickly to find solutions to come up with an enhanced design. That very much an agile approach of how do we find working software, working processes that are demonstrable to people over written down requirements that, to be honest, are interpreted by different people in different ways.
So just on that, and you talked a little bit about innovation. We actually have a question here from one of the attendees. Steve, I'll send this one your way, which is, how important is it to drive the innovation in a project delivery and enable the team to think differently? And how do you balance that with delivery? What are some of the key factors? And I can definitely appreciate that, because when you're going to a more customer-centric approach, there's that innovation, but when does it start constraining a particular project, and how do you balance that with delivery? Steve, do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because it's almost like, one person's innovation is another person's scope creep. And we have to be really careful that we are measuring the impact of innovation in terms of value. Because often you can have competing areas of innovation within projects. So you've got to kind of be able to harness that in a way that you're making enhancements to the project, perhaps to the functionality within a project, but doing that in such a way that you're not diluting the ultimate value of the project. So I think it is a fine line. I think you have to do it in a controlled manner. And you have to do it in a cognizant manner, as I said before, determined by its impact on value. So I don't think there's a silver bullet for this. I think it's actually part of good project management and good project governance to determine those areas that you're happy to innovate in, but doing so within some constraint.
Yeah, I'd agree. That goes back to that strong project leadership to actually give you the boundaries, the train tracks to run between to innovate within. It's not a free-for-all. It's about applying innovation in the right way to achieve the right outcome. And the product owners and your leadership team should feed that right information back up to make the decisions.
So just on that, Russ, another question here from the attendees is, how do you embed the voice of customer in testing when you're working on the supplier side without overwhelming the customer or it being interpreted as a lack of understanding, which I can understand would be, possibly an issue?
Mm-hmm. Look, there's a number of techniques to do this, and one is the customer impact mapping, but it's really understanding the people in the chain. And when you're supplying software, it's really building that partnership and focusing on success for you and your your partners in your software delivery, your ecosystem. So it's how you focus on the customer and the impacts in the change, and then embedding the voice of the customer. Once you understand the customer and what's important to the people in the chain, you embed that in a number of techniques, from verification, from automation of the success for those people, and you're embedding it to verify at the earliest possible point in the process. It comes back to, how do you verify success early? And quite often it's as simple as actually engaging directly with people, not in IT systems. It's eliciting that verification from your suppliers, your people in the chain, going out with beta software to actually engage. And there's numerous techniques of doing this, but the most effective way is to engage, show people, talk them through the proposed, and then actually measure the impacts of the changes with them.
So just to change gears here, sorry, Steve, did you want to?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, we have a view around co-design and co-deployment, and I think it's kind of interesting that the comment, which was without overwhelming people. I think it's right from the start is actually taking people on the journey. I know that's a much used and much cliched sort of phrase, but it is about taking them with you through that design and development stage and then through the deployment stage. So people are part of it and not having it done to them. You know, we talked about project success, and one of the PMI attributes of project success is that people use whatever it is you've delivered. Yeah, and the best way to ensure that you have that right level of change management is to engage with people from the start and then take them all the way through to the end. So, and you bake that into the way that you do things on your project.
So just to change gears a little bit, I want to talk a bit about automation. There is a lot of movement and even conversations I've been having around businesses of test automation, remove the people out of it, lower the cost, make it faster for us. Where does test automation come in? How and how much, Russ?
So as early as possible is always my view. So look, automation is something that if you build in at the start, a successful automation strategy works on building a minimum viable product that actually enables the development team. It defines the success of the piece of software functionality under test through the lens of the customers. You're testing to the customer outcomes with automation. Deliver a minimum viable product to the development team. It enables them to actually start to embrace fast iterations of code drops. You're looking to remove the wastage in the process of developers developing in isolation, throwing it to the test or automation harness, and then raising defects. You want that continuous testing as an aid to expediting development delivery. And that's how it helps you, because it starts to build trust around your delivery. Your goal is fast incremental change at speed, and you're building your development, your automation in early to verify as a customer, allowing your development team to get confidence in their changes and continuously verify and iterate through their code changes. That just starts building the customer lens throughout the process, but it also allows them to start delivering really quickly. And it's reducing that wastage in the traditional IT delivery approaches, which is what we're looking to do.
So is there a significant investment that you first need to make into the testing environment before it can be automated?
Yeah, you need to understand exactly what it means for your organization. If you look at something like Amazon, they release to production, I think it's every 14 to 15 seconds now. And they do that because they've got high trust in their delivery teams, because their customer outcomes are protected. So you have to understand the cost of automation when you look at it in isolation can be significant, but you've got to have a wider lens. You've got to have a wider lens on the return on investment, the speed it enables you to make changes at, not just during project life, but the wider reducing the cost of operating when you go into production, future changes, because software continually changes. But you need to know that your customer outcomes are respected. So building in at the start initially does look like a higher cost, but you've got to have a real, and So real focus on having an understanding what it's going to cost to set up the foundation, the tools, the processes, the maintenance investment, but also an understanding of the ongoing cost of not having automation that enables you to change at speed, build trust in change. And you have to measure it. It's really up to the project to show the value early and continuously measure that.
So just one more question here, Russ, on autonomous testing. And this is about, if we look forward where we're going in the industry, there's this idea of embedding autonomous validation code into the business software. When we're starting to create that and build that into business software, will that ultimately change how we test?
I think it will, yes, in my opinion. I think it will allow us to have more focused manual testing on high value areas. I see it as a good thing, but I don't see it removing the need for manual testing. I have a lot of conversations with people such as, having just done the IR project, there was a lot of concern around what it meant for the teams. Well, the teams were able to focus on higher value testing. They did less testing, but it was higher value and more interesting. It allows you to be really constrained about where you place your effort of your manual testing.
I want to pivot here again, and I want to look at creating visibility during the project and measurements and what might be required there. Steve, a question for you. Sometimes businesses will be looking, they use a lot of system integrators, SIs, out in the industry to help with their build and their deploy. And some of these SIs have test capability. Is there benefit in having your SI and test partners separate, or is it sometimes better to have them as one?
That's a very good question, Michelle. And as an ex-SI, I kind of, I feel myself being conflicted here. But I think experience would tell me that test operates best when it's in an independent manner. So having an independent test capability. And no disrespect to my SI colleagues, but it's a bit like asking you to mark your own homework. So having this independent view of test, I think, is a definite advantage to any project. And I'll take it one step further. I've seen projects where the test director or the test manager sits on the governance board next to the project. So not within the project, but next to the project. And that enables the SRO or the project sponsor to have that additional data point and that additional comfort that everything is right on the project. And you may think that that could be quite an adversarial relationship, but depending on the maturity of the organizations, it doesn't have to be. In fact, the examples we've seen, it wasn't adversarial. Both sides work very, very well together. So bottom line, independence is key, and the more data points you can have around project health is a benefit.
Yeah, I'd agree.
So Russ, how do you get visibility then across the project? What is necessary in providing some visibility throughout the development life cycle from a testing perspective?
So I think it goes back to having those key management information dashboards, being very clear. I mean, your leadership, when you set out as a program delivery, you're clear on what customer success looks like, what the management information that confirms that success, and it comes in many forms, but you're looking for the leadership team to be very clear. And you start that as early as possible. So how have I verified that customer outcome, the end user outcome? How have I got that information to confirm that we're on the right track, that we're getting fast feedback into the loops? And that starts right at the start when you're looking to verify prototypes, you're looking to verify beta versions of code, or even when you start your implementation of your unit and system testing, you're looking to verify that information as defined that contributes to building that progressive confidence that your code is going to meet the successful outcome. So you define success early, you're measuring it as a customer, but you're measuring it and building up that picture continuously from the first delivery of code, or even design rather.
One question we have here from the attendees is, and I'll read this one out, there are multiple digital levers which can drive digital transformation, such as technology intervention versus using RPA. Is there a guide for what to use when? And most organizations find cost as a factor to drive that. Is that the right culture?
It depends. It's an organization by organization. Cool. Well, what is your organizational goals you're trying to achieve? So there are multiple levers that you pull. It depends on what ultimately you as an organization want to achieve. Now, certain technologies will support that. Certain testing approaches will support that. Quite often when we look at working in the industry, if you're in more of a commercial sector, working at Vodafone very early on in their corporate systems program, the focus on their transformation was actually bringing together over 50 different corporate systems into one. They'd grown at an exponential rate. So their focus was very much on, we're going to transform at speed. We're focusing on a single COTS product. We're actually not going to base requirements. We're just going to test using business testers. We have a separation of functionality, get it in and start testing immediately. So it really does depend on the organization and what goals you're trying to achieve. In that case, it was, we need to have a centralized COTS product. Other organizations, it's how we integrate at speed. But in doing that, how do we integrate at speed while building a platform that doesn't introduce costs later? So it's taking that step back, identifying what the goals the organization is trying to achieve, what will make it successful and contribute to those goals, and tailoring your approach accordingly. There is no one size fits all in my experience.
Yeah, I'd echo that, Russ. I mean, I said before, I've got a bit of a military background, and one of my favorite sayings is that, time spent on reconnaissance is seldom wasted. So for me, it's about that initial analysis. Like I say, there are many levers that you can pull. Do I increase functionality into a product, or do I automate an existing process? And I think you have to link it back to the original driver. What is it you're trying to achieve? With that transformation. Is it a cost out exercise? Is it a speed exercise? So once you know what those drivers are, then that can then flavor your decision making or color your decision making as you go forward.
Or at most will help prioritize if you're trying to balance that innovation within a certain cost structure. It's about balancing that and prioritization. But it's very, very dependent. Just on the customer lens, it's more of a statement, but it'd be good to get some of your thoughts on this, Russ and Steve. And that is, some of the best results this person has seen with an innovation lens on a project is when you're integrating customer experience insights into a project. And then that cycles into a customer prototyping and testing, and you're constantly refining it in the project. Is that the best way to apply that customer-centric into the application development, deployment, and testing, is to constantly be, have that customer experience insight up front, and then that constant prototyping, testing, fast, quick validation in the marketplace to keep things moving. And that's how you can embed that innovation into the project.
Yeah, I mean, from my opinion, I'm really passionate about this because I've been through it with Inland Revenue recently, but it was that ability to focus on that innovation right at the core, build that automation around how do we provide a working software bed. They embraced, and they had a very inspirational BT test lead who focused on how do I embed the voice of the customer, and he did that using automation to look at contract testing, provide working software that enabled external partners to test against really quickly, and in doing so he enabled that fast feedback loops. So he was providing a minimum viable product, working prototype software based around APIs that responded with data that the customers could actually learn to consume really quickly and provide fast feedback without actually incurring management overheads, meeting overheads, people costs. He removed people out of the chain and he focused on getting the voice of the customer in early, getting fast feedback loops at the point while inland revenue was still developing. And therefore change becomes more measured, easier to consume at that point because you're still developing. So emotionally, you're still open to change in your development processes.
Yeah, and I'd kind of echo that as well, even from a sort of, design thinking and sort of innovation standpoint, that early working with the customer, what is it they need? What is it they want? Because, we remember those success factors for a successful project and, people use it. Yeah, it works as designed. So we need to ensure that what we're producing is going to be consumed and people are going to do that voluntarily. So working with users at the early stages to make sure that the functionality you're designing is what they want and what they need is key to success moving forward. So fail fast, fail safe, and do that early prototyping.
What I'd like to do right now is anyone that is actually on the call, any of the attendees, I believe that most of you are muted. You can unmute your mic. And if there's a question you'd like to ask Russ and Steve verbally versus having to type it into the chat, I'll just pause here for a moment and see if anyone has any questions. No, okay. Let me ask one question here, which is the impact to total cost of ownership, TCO. Russ, what do you see as a result of having that customer-centric testing? How does that impact the ongoing management and maintenance of that particular digital transformation initiative?
So again, I've taken a step back. I mean, if an organization has a real focus on how do we reduce the total cost of ownership, and typically when you're undergoing a transformation, it is because you want to provide a more integrated, functionally rich environment to be faster, change at speed, provide a better service, provide you the ability to deliver change at speed. So when you have a good approach to testing, a solid comprehensive test strategy, it lays that foundation for your testing. It lays that foundation for that reducing the total cost of ownership, because it's about measuring those indirect costs. So when you look at the cost of change or implementing change, if you've got a robust test strategy, you're able to change really quickly, but still respect your customer outcomes. And that then continues as you go into the operating mode, because you've got assets that then can be continually used to support change without standing up large project teams. And you go back to why Amazon can release every 14, 15 seconds, because they have a really robust testing approach. They don't just make a change and hope for the best. They understand that when they make a change, they've got the right investment in testing that enables them to respect those outcomes. So their cost of operation goes down, and the benefit of introducing at speed and trusting their development teams changes, I guess, the culture of the company to focus on doing good things at speed for their customers.
Great. Well, thank you, Russ and Steve. What I'll do is just ask each of you one wrap-up question, and then I'll see if there's any lasting questions from those on the call. Steve, let me start with you. What are 3 critical requirements for project success from your perspective and your experience?
Well, I'm kind of driven by some of the research that's come out of the Treasury around review of projects, and for them, the 3 greatest risk to project success. Number 1, and it's been consistently number 1, is governance. Number 2 is how you deal with risk, and how you manage, monitor, mitigate project risk. And what a lot of people do is they transfer that risk to a systems integrator, and that is fraught with problems. So having a robust and mature attitude to risk, I think, is essential. And the third one would be around change management and transition into service. It's something that we don't handle very well, and I'm using that we as a sort of a collective we. We just aren't very good at it. So that onboarding, deployment and transition to service aspect, we don't manage as well as we could. So if we had to focus on three of many, those would be my three.
Great, thank you. Russ, I have a slightly different question for you. What are three actions that businesses could do differently today from a testing perspective to ensure or increase the probability of project success?
So for me, it's having an overarching testing, number one, have an overarching testing vision that aligns to how you're going to get return on investment from testing, that aligns with your outcome, the business goals. Then the second point is take that outside in view of the world in being customer-centric. So understand the outside in as well as your internal customers. And understanding that process streamlines your outcome, it streamlines your testing, and actually will enable you to focus on how do you make testing a real benefit add rather than a cost center that traditionally it's seen as. And understand that will then enhance, give your organization the ability to become very culturally, make a cultural change, how you can take a focus on change through the eyes of your customer. So it's probably that testing vision, outside in view, and cultural change.
Great, thank you. Just seeing what the time is, what I might do is I'll just wrap up today's session to keep everybody on time. I want to thank first Steve and Russ for your participation in this discussion. Thank you very much for your viewpoints, and thank you everyone for attending. One thing I do want to let everybody know is we are going to have a post webinar survey and would really like to have your feedback. Tell us if this type of format was useful, or if you actually do appreciate more of a PowerPoint type of discussion. Also, Cass, can you just share the our next three events and webinars that we have in case those that are on the call might be interested as we start sending out the invites around that? We have a webinar that we're going to be talking about, in particular, Microsoft D365 environments, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we're holding that event at the end of September. And then we have, well, that's a webinar. Then we're also having two face-to-face events, depending on how lockdown goes for us. One will be down in Wellington in mid-September, and that one's going to be looking at that customer-centricity and looking at how that works from a testing perspective. So create what matters and test what counts. So bringing in that customer experience, something that one of the attendees had asked about and made a comment on, embedding that in there. And then here in Auckland, we're going to be holding a session on RPA, and that was asked about as well in today's session. So again, these dates are looking that we might need to move them out in light of the lockdown that we have here in New Zealand, but the webinar will be happening regardless. So with that, I would like to thank everyone. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Russ, for your time. Here is our emails if you have any follow-on questions or want to reach out to us directly. And thank you very much, everyone, for your time. Stay safe and stay healthy. Bye.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks, Russ, and thanks, Steve, and thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.